Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I will give a few seconds for you to connect your audio. I see some of you are connecting your audio still, so just give me a few seconds for everybody to be able to listen to us. Meanwhile, thank you for the ones that can listening to me already. Thank you for coming. If you want, you can introduce yourself in the chat so we know who you are and where you are coming from. For those of you that don't know Interaction Design Foundation or the Winter Talks, Interaction Design Foundation is a learning platform dedicated to interaction design. And I've been leading the Lisbon group for quite a few years. And last year we decided to do the Winter Talks so we can still interact with each other and learn with each other, even though we are all home and unable to leave and meet people. So I hope you like this initiative. We have been doing this in partnership with EDIT and OutSystems. EDIT is also a school with many design courses, like from motion, from UX, also development. And OutSystems is a low-code platform. So if you don't know them, check them out as well. Today we will have Desislava Genova being our speaker. I will let her introduce in a second. I just want to let you know that the talk will last around 1 hour, but you can post questions in the chat to her. If you see any topic that you want to know a little bit more, be free to ask anything you want on the chat. And in the end, we will have a Q&A session where you can unmute yourself and make your own questions. So once again, thank you all for coming. Desi, thanks a lot for accepting this invite. And with no further ado, I will let you present yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks, Joanna. And first of all, really thank you for the invitation. I have followed some of the other talks and they have been great. So I'm really excited to be speaking here tonight. And thanks to everyone who is actually going to take a full hour to listen to me. I hope I won't bore you too much, but as Joanna said, if there's any questions and while I'm speaking, just pop them out to the chat and we'll try to break it up a bit and answer some of those questions. I hope you also have some drinks ready. If you don't, maybe you have a couple of minutes before we start to actually go and grab something. But as we go forward, so today we're going to speak about designing a scale, how to avoid choosing between quality and speed. I'm sure you have seen the title when you have been signing up for the event. If not, I'm not sure how you're really choosing the events that you participate. But before we actually start into this fun and speak a bit more about it, I wanted to go and actually ask you a question, and I would ask you to take the chat and just pop any of the answers or ideas that you have there. So first of all, I have to apologize because what I have picked is something that might be a bit triggering, and it's not the best topic at this time where we are at the global pandemic, everything's closed. But actually my question is, how would you organize a trip? Like, can you tell me, and maybe use the chat to put what are the first things that you would do when you actually want to organize a trip? And don't worry, there are no wrong answers, maybe. Oh, I promise there are no wrong answers. So very first thing, check Google. All right, Alini, what are we going to check on Google? Okay, we have budget. Think of where I want to go. Making a checklist. All right, we have some really varied ideas in there. We're going to check the weather. Find an organized friend. Yeah, that's a really good tactic. Plan dates. Destination, budget, duration, way of transport. try to get inspired. Okay. All right. So, I mean, those are some really, really good answers. As I said, there were no wrong or right ones. But basically what I have in here, it's a lot of the things that you already covered. So I have put what are some of the thoughts or things that I might when I go over organizing a trip. So first, I'm going to look at what kind of trip it is. If I'm being sent from work to a conference or something, probably the things that I'll be looking after that will be quite different from if I'm just planning my 2 weeks holiday for the summer. So once I know that, I'll probably look at who I'm going with. I think some of you already mentioned that. So am I going solo? Am I going to be making all of the choices? Am I traveling with a group? Is it with my friends? Is it with my partners? The more people there are, the more complicated it will be because we'll have to align on many things. We'll have to decide what activity we want to do if it's not only me. Some people prefer to go to the beach, some would like to go hiking. So we'll need to get to a common decision where and what we want to do. Then we might need to align on dates. When do we have our holidays? When is a good time to travel? And once we have that, we might try to figure out a few of the other things, like where we want to go, how do we get there, for how long we can stay, can we afford that, are there direct flights? So all of those things, and I think most of the answers were actually touching on this part of organizing a trip. And then once you have all of this done, like you'd probably go into buying your tickets, you'd book a hotel, you might get travel insurance, depending on where the destination is. Probably you're going to look at other things. Maybe you need to do currency exchange, you need to pack your luggage, maybe you want to book some additional activities, but finally you'll be able to actually go on the trip that you have been thinking of. I mean, we were kind of aligned on the things and the approach that we would have there, and I have put those ones here on the slide, and I have also very conveniently color-coded some of the things and the way I want to split and speak about things. So if we just look at this first part, and we take the questions out, and those were most of the things that you kind of naturally suggested that you start with. You can use the chat again if you want to give suggestions, but what, like how would you call this phase? What did you exactly do there? You can use only one word. Okay, planning. All right. I'm just going to go because that's what I had. I didn't get to try and like ask more. And then this was actually our plan to achieve a specific goal. Our goal was to go on a trip somewhere, and we needed to decide where, how, and figure out all of those things. If we look at the second part, it actually was the execution part. So we decided, we took some specific actions and activities we wanted to do in order to go on the trip. So buying the tickets, booking the hotel, and so on. And if we want to use slightly different words to describe the planning and the executing, that's going to be strategy and tactics. And again, I'm going to ask you to use the chat, but do you think that one of those is more important? Where do we have to spend more time and effort? Do you have any idea, or just what you're thinking around that? Here you can use full sentences. You can say, yeah, we want to spend a lot of time planning. We want to spend a lot of time executing. So we have some people saying that the strategy is more important, both of equal importance. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's see actually if any of those are true. So I have actually managed to squeeze in a quote from the Art of War. Haven't actually read all of it, but I like the quote, and I think that's something that really like kind of represents the idea behind that. So basically, if you're looking at only strategy without any tactics, that's the slowest route to victory. Or if you're doing only tactics, that's the noise before defeat. Or if we want to show it in a bit more visual way, what we're looking at here, if we're paying a lot of attention to strategy and we put a lot of effort and time planning, we'll be too slow, and at some point probably we're not going anywhere. If we want to just hit the ground running and start executing without spending any time on planning, at the end, in the long run, this is probably not going to be the most efficient things, because we're not going to have great quality over the things that we're doing. So basically, I think someone said it, that where we want to be is where strategy and tactics are actually balanced. So basically what we want to see here, it's this. And why I started with this kind of example, it wasn't because I wanted to point out how good am I at planning trips, or I have achieved perfection in that, but I wanted just to point out that for a lot of things that we naturally do, and the way we approach things, we already have this kind of approach in building this, and not even for trips, even sometimes for smaller things. Now I'm going to mention another thing that's kind of triggering, but imagine that you want to go to the cinema. You'd probably spend some time checking what they're screening at the moment. You might go to IMDb and check ratings. You might compare what the films are before you actually commit to spend whatever money you need to spend for the ticket. So that's something that if we're doing in our day-to-day lives for most things, I was thinking, how is that actually applied to design? And how does that relate to the topic of the talk that I have chosen? And I realized that he's been kind of a long intro, and I also didn't present myself, and probably we're not sure if we're going to speak about design or not, but I'm actually a designer, and I think that's why that's the reason I'm here. But yeah, I am UX design lead. Hello everyone, and thanks for being here. As I said, thanks for going through the intro, and I think we're going to look into how that ties up in design, and like what that means. But first, I wanted just to spend a quick few minutes to actually give an intro to myself and why I'm here and what I'm doing and what we will be actually talking about. So yeah, as I said, my name is Desislava, but you can all call me Desi. That's my nickname. Everyone uses that. I'm a UX design lead, and currently I'm working at a fintech called TrueLayer. So bear with me through this. I'll try to explain to you really quickly what it means. But basically what we do is we build intelligent infrastructure and try to empower anyone to create smarter financial services. And I realized that just putting it out there like that, probably it's really hard to grasp and understand, like what it is. But if I have to simplify and just say what we are doing is connecting businesses with banks in real time, and we are enabling them to make initiate payments, get access to data, and get insights out of that. So I joined TrueLayer, I think it was around 2.5 years ago. And I think when I joined, we were around maybe 15 or 20 people. So that was basically TrueLayer. That was the structure. We could all sit in one room and we could take decisions together. All of those processes were really easy because we could communicate, and it was great days. In terms of design, there was also a very good proportion. There was a head of design, there was a visual designer, and then there was myself as the UX UI designer. I joined, and in a few months, the company really started growing quickly. We saw that teams that were just one person, they started to actually form real departments. There were 2-3 people in a team. So basically, we started seeing the structure of a company really forming. And at this point, the design team was also growing as well. And it was a really exciting time because we had this centralized, and this XD there stands for experience design. It's not actually the emoji, but that's how we were calling our team. It was a centralized experience design team. And the most exciting thing was that it wasn't only designers. We actually had front-end engineers. We started having full-stack engineers. And we were owning almost all of the front-end products of the company. So we had a lot of freedom of taking decisions and how we approach things. And this actually helped us to bring the design maturity of the whole company to a different level for the stage that we were at the moment. And even if we had to work with some of the product teams that at the moment were mostly product manager and back-end engineers, we still worked quite well, and there weren't many problems. And at this point, quite naively, I thought like, oh, as the company keeps growing, like we will just be able to maintain that, and it's going to be a linear process. The team is going to grow, everything's going to work perfectly. But what we saw is that the company kept growing. Our product teams actually started getting more and more complex. So they started breaking down in smaller teams. They were still made out of product managers and backend engineers, but they were a lot more vertically oriented and needed a lot more focus and a lot more work and collaboration with us, which wasn't working out great with having just one centralized team working with all of the rest. So at this point, we thought that as a company, we need to change the way we work and start working in more cross-functional teams. So what that meant that in all of those product teams, apart from the product managers and backend engineers, there was an embedded product designer, there was an embedded front-end developer, full-stack developer. So the idea is that each of those teams will be able to have their own focus. They're going to be able to execute way faster, and they will have a lot more autonomy to do things as well. We also kept the centralized team, but the team was just made of the group that was working on our design system. So all of the consistency and everything that was happening on the system was on this team, and I was sitting there, and we were also having the product designers embedded in the team. And it sounded like a great idea, and it was, I think everyone was excited to try this out, and we're like, okay, we're going to do better things, we're going to do them faster. But at some point after doing that for a while, we realized that there was a problem and something wasn't working quite as good as we expected it. So what was the problem? We were still in a very fast-paced industry. There were a lot of newly formed teams. Those teams had a lot more stakeholders, people who have joined recently, they had a lot more different experiences, and we weren't just used to work together. And also we had finite resources, so we had time limitation. Of course, there were way too many projects for the people that were there to work on. And how that affected us is that there was a lot less time for planning. Usually, by the time design was involved, in any kind of project, decisions were made, there was already a product brief, or there was already something defined as what deliverable should be. And it wasn't great because a lot of the time, some of those decisions were just made on assumptions, just because our competitors are doing it and we think that we should do it as well. And a lot of times there were also unclear goals and priorities when those things were brought up, especially for the designers working on those teams. And it wasn't clear for them how they should approach things and how they should do things. So what happened at some point is that product designers found themselves just executing and being overwhelmed with work. And they were just trying to stay on top and trying to do those things. And there was not a really way to address that. It was really hard for someone to step up and go and say like, hey, can we do that? Can we get involved? It just didn't work very well. And usually when we're looking at things, I have already asked the what, how, and now you're probably expecting the question of like who was responsible for that or what happened. But I would highly suggest whenever there's a situation like that or there's a problem that involves many people, never ever try to find like someone responsible, or never trying to find someone to point a finger at. This doesn't work. This doesn't solve the problem. So it's actually way better to solve and focus on the problem and just think how you can actually solve it. And I think that was around the time that I joined the product organization as a design lead, and just trying to think how exactly and what are the things we can do in order to change things up, to enable also designers to work better, to speak out, and to be more involved in the process. So if you're looking at what we have there, the first thing kind of naturally when you think is, okay, like we have there the execution, the tactics, we're doing only that. So maybe we should optimize this process, right? What we want to do is just execute in shorter amount of time, but we want to have the same or better quality. And this kind of solves the problem halfway, but even if this gives us a bit more time to do research, to do a bit more planning, if there has already been a decision that has been reached before that, no matter how much research or planning or anything that we do at this point after that, it's just going to be a waste of time. So on the other hand, what we want to do is we want to have a more strategic approach. And by that, I mean, we want to get design involved in the planning process earlier, and we want to be part of those decision-making process and not be left out. So after having said all this, I mean, maybe you have already guessed, but today I want to just touch on two things. One is the strategic design approach, and then how to optimize some of the tactics. And those are just some of the learnings or things that I have seen in my time and trying to work on at TrueLayer. So if we move on first to the strategic design approach. So just quickly go over strategic design again. So when we speak about design and strategic design, we speak about identifying opportunities, formulating a plan, defining a scope. So your strategy should be about what you're going to do, but also what you're not going to do. That should be clear in there. It's something that affects you long term. And at the end, what should that help you and get you? It should be better quality solutions. So moving on. You're probably wondering, where should I start? And that's actually a very good question. And I think it's really hard to make a switch, especially depending on where you're working, how the teams are structured. It is really hard to think how to make this shift or from where to start. And I think sometimes us as designers, just because we are so focused on users or on empathy, on the user's needs, whenever we try to find the solution, we try to dig deeper into the area that we are comfortable. And we think that the more we know, after that, we're just going to be seen as the expert and everyone understands the user needs and how important they are. And we're just going to be called out. But the truth is that no one's going to come and tell us like, hey, okay, yeah, come, like, tell me what you think, unless we actually find a way to speak the same language and speak about the same things. So my first advice would be to really try to understand the business. And by that, I mean, try to understand your business strategy, try to understand what your company is doing. I don't know if you're convinced that that's important by now, but I don't know if how many designers are on the call today and to how many of this has actually happened. But to me, it has been very often to find myself invited to a meeting, be in a conference, and finally, like, it would be something important. We'll be discussing something about the business, and I'm like, oh, great, like finally I have a seat at the table. I'm great, like they just thought of me all of a sudden. And then, like someone is going to address me and I'm like, oh my God, they're actually going to ask for my opinion. And then I'll be asked something like, oh, Desi, can you take care of the slides, by the way? And it's not a really nice feeling when you're there and when you're perceived as, like the person to be, like just to take care of the slides and put, like what the others are doing and how to, like just how to visualize the important things that everyone is doing. So that's why I think it's really important to think, like just know, like what the business strategy is. Do you know what the goal is? Know what the mission is? Like I started with just putting out the mission, the purpose of TrueLayer, and like maybe you didn't understand it now, but I think it's important to start thinking and involving those things. And you should definitely try to understand what's important for the companies and what are the metrics and what's going to move the needle for your company, because that's really going to help you start thinking more about the outcome over the input. And what I mean by that is, when you're starting to work on a project or when you approach things, try not to think of the deliverables, try not to think of the screens that you're going to have, try not to think of the specific feature. Instead, try to think of the results, try to think of the impact. Is the thing that you're doing going to move the needle somehow for the business? Like, is it going to change the numbers? Is it going to have an impact on what the business goal is? And is it going to get us closer there? And when you start thinking like that, you start finding different problems, and maybe you start suggesting things. And this is going to be appreciated. Once you have things to actually offer and suggest that are going to be of interest to those business people, they're going to start to involve you. And when they see the results and the outcome of what you're suggesting, you'll be involved the next time. And this will also help you next time when you're in a meeting and someone tells you like, hey, can you take care of the slides? You can say like, yeah, of course I can help you with the slides, but I can actually do a lot more for this project, and just go and do it. So yeah, around that, just try to, I think once you start doing this and you start thinking about numbers, about projects, I think it's really easy to try and go for some of those short wins that are going to underestimate the value of the users, and they're going to be a quick win for the business, but always try to think and balance those things. What you should be trying to do is really get the user needs and the business goals, and try to see how those ones align and where the ones fits into the other. So moving on from this one, next thing I would suggest and try to do for everyone is to understand the technical side of things. And I know that saying that, many, especially designers, are thinking, well, a lot of us are actually pretty good coders. We know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you know, like maybe some front-end frameworks, maybe React. But what I see less often is actually designers interested in understanding what's happening behind the scenes. So what's happening on the back end. And it's really important if you're working on a product to, you know, like, obviously I'm not saying to go and you know, like become a full stack engineer, but I think it's really important to have a high level understanding of what the product you're working on is doing behind the scene. How is it working? What are the services there? Where are we storing data? How are we doing that? And the most important thing that you have to take out of this, apart from understanding how it works, you should know way better what the constraints are. Because it's absolutely essential when you're trying to design or come up with a solution or think of something, to know what's actually feasible and what's not. Because the biggest mistake is to try and actually fix something or design something that doesn't work on the back end, but you're trying to put it in an interface. No matter what you do and no matter how good of a designer you are, if that doesn't work on the back end, you're just going to have a broken user experience. So try not to do that, and try to learn as much as you can. Speak to engineers, help them to ask them to help you out, and spend some time to just show you things. And here, I mean, probably you have been waiting for this moment. I didn't have a Venn diagram so far, so you have all probably seen this one, but I thought that it's just a good moment to reinforce what I said, because this actually touches on the things that I said. We're already very focused on user needs. What we need to add to get to this spot where we can really design good user experiences is to have the intersection between also the business goal and the technical constraints. And having said all that, it is great if you have all of this knowledge, and if it's great that you know, like, you have the context, you can think of those things, you can notice them. But if you just try to do things by yourself, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's another thing that I have seen very often. Designers, especially on the embedded teams, feel quite lonely. You know, like they kind of work in silos. Sometimes they go to stand-ups or do things, but they don't feel really involved. So as a design lead, I would suggest everyone to start collaborating more, first of all, with the product manager of the team they're on. Make sure that you do the same thing with the business goal. Speak to the product manager, learn what the team goals are, learn what the metrics are, what's important, how do we measure success, what's going to be the roadmap, and try to make a plan for your design work that's going to fit into those goals. And that's actually going to help the product reach the results that we want, to reach the metrics that we need. Start the conversation, and then it's going to be way easier to also have those conversations with product managers, but also involve designers and have this kind of holistic overview of what we're doing. The same thing goes for the tech lead. Make sure that you speak to them, show them show them what you're thinking, ideas, see what's feasible again, make sure that you're aligned. And one thing that's very important in this kind of collaboration is try to, I think sometimes there's a lot of overlap of the different roles. So product managers might be doing some research, then they might be doing some wireframes or thinking of the product in a certain way. Designers can do the same. And I think sometimes it's really easy to feel that there's a lot of stepping on each other's toes or trying to take the work of someone, or, you know, like try to see who is the better expert, or just not understanding who is accountable for what. So make sure that you take this one out of the way in the beginning, make sure that you have this conversation and it's clear. Product manager is the product owner, you know, like the ultimate decision stays with him. Tech lead is thinking of the technical decisions, and obviously designers do the same with design. That doesn't mean that we cannot question each other's decisions and try to reach to the best possible solution to the problem that we have at hand. And that leads me to kind of the next section, or advice, which is once we have a problem and once we have started those conversations of maybe what could be the solution, what's the direction that we want to be going, what needs to be done and what needs to understand, we should usually go through a discovery phase. And one thing that I would start with here, and I think it's very important, is that we should try to stray away from making decisions just based on bias and assumptions. And I kind of touched upon that a bit earlier. And what I have seen very often is we assume that something is the right way to go or the right solution just because competitors are doing, and we have seen it in a couple of places, but we don't really have the visibility of what the results of this thing is for our competitors. We don't really know how is that going to interact with our system. So what I would suggest at this stage is to just try and sit together and try to find out what the knowns and the unknowns. What are the things that we know? Try to get the context out. Do we know for who are we designing this? Is it for already existing clients? Is it for a new audience? What are the unknowns? Is it a completely new feature, or is it a new feature that we don't know why is it converting and we need to change something? So depending on the answers that you get here, you should go and do some research. So this stage can really vary a lot depending on what you're trying to find out. Obviously, new projects will have a lot more research and they will have different methods that you need to imply. So I'm not really going to touch into that because it's a really broad topic, and I don't think that's I can give you a lot of advice on how to address that in just 10 minutes. But one thing to point out is that whenever research starts, there's always this moment where we get up here, where we have a lot of information and everything seems very broad and there's just a lot going on. And what I have seen is that usually other people involved in research, they're really scared because they think that especially designers would like to do everything. And that's why sometimes I have heard that, you know, like, let's do less research or let's do something, you know, like we cannot do everything at the same time. But the point of research, and something that you should try to make very clear, is not to get us there and to try to follow this kind of like line down and just execute everything. The point is to give us the overview, see what's there, and give us the right kind of perspective so we can actually go down to the stage of define and reach just the right kind of problem and one single thing that we want to address. So in the next stage, that's what we want to do. We have a lot of information. It's very broad. It's very scary for everyone. So just try to get and analyze it. Raw data by itself and a lot of research doesn't really mean anything. So you should try to get it, and there are different methods of analyzing it, but make sure that you start finding patterns, you start finding out what are the interesting things and start comparing them. And this is going to really help you get to the next point, which is just trying to make the right trade-offs and decide what's the scope of the project that you're working on. It's going to help you decide if you're going to do something or not. And speaking about trade-offs, that's usually a very, very tricky part of every project or any kind of interaction, just because it is not simply taking a decision. Usually it's just aligning a lot of people, trying to get them to a consensus and trying to get them to reach some kind of decision together. And this is a very crucial point where you should try to approach in different ways depending on what you're doing. So what I have put here is when you find yourself in kind of a project that's involving many different stakeholders, and if it's a project that's really unknown, maybe involves many different teams, you don't have a very clear goal, try to meditate, like try to be the mediator in the process, try to gather the requirements, try to see what you have, try to compile this information, and try to lead the process so it's easier to reach a conclusion. That works very well in some cases, but in other cases, let's say you're working with your team and there's something that's a shared goal, everyone has been involved. If you just to try to do that, you will annoy a lot of people. It will feel that you're just trying to take decisions for someone. So you should try to judge the situation. In other cases, it's way better to be collaborative. Just bring everyone together, spend some time, and let them take the decision in this kind of forum where everyone has equal say in the things. It is not easy to do that and judge the situation always, but I think it really makes a difference when you see that and when you realize what's the situation, to try and have a different approach when you work with people. And related to that, just try to, if you're trying to do that, try to avoid group thinking bias, especially when you have a lot of people trying to collaborate together. I have seen many times just suboptimal decisions being taken just because we want to keep the harmony, or there's maybe one person who has a stronger opinion and they're putting pressure on the rest and we don't want to steer things. So really try to take a look at that and see whenever there's this kind of collaborative environment, if everyone is getting their say, if we're actually challenging each other to reach a decision. And yeah, this should hopefully help us move from there at the top, like to this point where at the end of this kind of discover and define phase, we should know what we're doing and what we are not. So we should have a problem statement that's quite defined. Usually we might need to, we might have a user journey or a user map or something like this that will help us to move to the next stage. And just final thing from this kind of section and this strategy part, one thing that it's really important is to try and take design from behind the scene. I think very often, especially in the engineer-driven companies, even when there's a presentation of a new product launch or anything, design is kind of, or the impact of design is kind of not seen or left behind. And that's something that we should try to drive in designers, and we should try to speak about. And we should try to do that not only with the rest of the designers, because I have seen that as well. We celebrate very well our successes as like design team, even if we're embedded in different teams, or sometimes even with our own team. But what we should try to do is just really do this company-wide. If there's anything that we have found out, even if it's just research, analytics, we should try to share those things. We should share the information that we have. And those are things that are interesting for everyone and they're really appreciated. We just need to find the right way to share it with the company. And most importantly, we should try to show the value of design. Again, think of the outcomes. Think of, instead of presenting the great work that everyone has done and the interface, that's also very important. We should try to highlight that, but always think of what was the value, what was the impact of the work that you were doing, how does that align with any of the team goals, any of the company goals, like did it make any difference? Because at the end, that's the thing that everyone will remember and everyone will care about next time when they think, oh, should we involve design in the process? They'll be like, oh yeah, design actually, like this really helped, the research that they did, the way we plan things, like it made a difference. But if they don't see that next time, they will again just forget about design, and they will give you a product brief to start and execute. This is just a quick summary of what I spoke about so far. And as I said to everyone, I'm just going to make a really quick pause here to also give you a little break of my voice and continue speaking, and also give you a chance to ask me any questions before I move to the next section. So yeah, feel free to use the chat. Joanna, if someone wants to, they can also try to unmute themselves and ask questions. So whatever feels more comfortable for you.
if you want to unmute yourselves and make questions outside the chat, you are able to. I just ask you all to unmute, so you can just unmute yourselves and make any question. Thank you.
Non si stava sentendo.
Hope you're enjoying the silence. If no one asks a question, I'll start speaking again in about 3 minutes.
We have a question from João Lino in the chat saying, how do you, your team, deal with big egos on those decision processes, defined stage? And how do you deal with stakeholders with strong opinions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, like usually I think it's big egos, strong opinions, and sense of maybe ownership of the product. So what I would suggest whenever you're trying to fight that, try to get as much data as you can as possible. I think that's what works. Sometimes just speaking to someone, convincing them, and you know, like you can have a great idea, or you can think it's going to work, but that's not really going to change their opinion. That's not really going to you know, like make them look in a different way. But if you actually have something to show them, if you have done some research, or maybe you have some data that you're collecting from you know, like the product, try to find those things, because that speaks a lot more to those people, and they cannot really find a way to answer if you just show them something that you know, like imagine that you wanted to show something that's not converting well, but they're saying like, no, actually that's the best thing, we should keep it. If you actually have the data and show them, or if you're doing some usability testing and you have recording of someone struggling to do that, take those things, highlight where the problems are, show the data, and that's really going to help at least move the conversation in some direction.
Anyone else wants to make a question?
No problem, Joe. Okay, I mean, we'll have more time for questions later. I'll keep going, and yeah, if anyone's thinking of anything or they just didn't have time to type it, keep it, and we'll address that at the end. All right, so moving on from the strategic approach, I'm just going to speak and go through a few things about just the tactics and maybe how we can make our work a bit more efficient and have the same or better results, but in less time. So just looking again at tactical design to refresh on what we said earlier. Tactical design is about implementing strategy or specific plan. It is specific activities or actions, and those are usually the day-to-day activities whenever you think of design, of product design. Those are the things that are involved. It can be UI design, visual design, information architecture, all of those things. It is restrained by finite resources, as I said. So usually that's time limitations, budget limitations, or just having too much work for not enough people to work on it. This is something usually a lot more short term, so the tactic can change from a project to project. And because of that, it's a lot more iterative than the actual strategy. So here, actually, we should track what we are doing and make changes according to what we see. All right, so moving on. First thing that I would suggest to look at whenever you're looking at the way you're working in the whole process, just try to identify if there are any repetitive tasks. Is there anything that takes a lot of time at the start of every project? Is there anything that you find yourself doing a lot? Identify those and try to find a way to make them reusable. So have reusable assets. Here, probably a lot of you are thinking of design systems, and that can be a great approach. I haven't put that here just as an item, because starting and doing a design system is a lot bigger project and is a strategic approach itself, and this is just part of it. So I'm speaking about the tactical part of, you know, like that can be a step towards having a design system. But if you think about the interfaces that you're doing in the work, there are so many components that you need to start from scratch sometimes, or you don't remember where exactly was the error displayed whenever you have an input field. Was it at the top? Was it at the bottom? Like maybe you have to create things over and over again. So try to have reusable assets, try to have libraries of whatever you're using, but you don't have to limit yourself only to UI components and assets and logos and those kind of things. You can think of any kind of work that you're repeating and just try to adopt this mindset of like, hey, am I doing this more often? Like, do I find myself doing this over and over again? And just try to find a way to reuse it. And I can give you an example. Recently, we started working with a lot of our clients to try and do UX, UI reviews of their specific flows, give them some advice to improve their conversion rates, because that directly affects our conversion rates and our numbers. So it was quite an important project. And we started doing that, and it was quite successful. And there were more and more clients who were asking for that. And at some point, we couldn't really deal with all of the requests, and we couldn't do that for all of the clients. We can do it for the bigger ones, but it was really, really hard to keep up with all of them. So what we did was we created some reusable guides. We found that there's a lot of the information that we're giving, even sometimes needs to be customized according to a use case. There's a lot we can extract and just put it in one guide where everyone can go see, and they can get almost 100% result as if one of us would go and tell them that. So that really helped and that really reduced the work. So just think about those things and try to find those ones. Depending on your work, depending on the company where you are, it can be very different, but trust me, there are some things that you can most definitely try and automate. One thing I would suggest to try and avoid here, it's really easy to get carried away and to try to have everything reusable and everything working. So make sure you don't take something really, really specific and try to make it generic, try to make it reusable, because then you're going to spend a lot more time trying to create templates or trying to create things for something that's going to be used once. And maybe it's better just to go and quickly do it and forget about it. Then once we have taken out the repetitive work out of the way, let's see how we go through the full flow and what are some things that we can do there. So one big takeaway from me is break down big tasks. So first thing, always try to start with the user flow. Normally, if research has been done that has already been part of it, and user flow or usability or user journey has been something that has been discussed in an earlier stage, but if there's not one, start with the user flow and start looking things from there. Then once you have that and the scope of what you're doing is defined, you can move on to wireframes, mocking up things, and all of the things that designers are doing. But my big advice here is try to look at what you have and try to break it down in smaller tasks. So let's say you're working on a really big project and you're redesigning a whole experience, or you're starting a new experience where you have maybe onboarding process, then you have a welcome screen, then you have a few different interactions and functions that users can do. Don't try to do everything at once. If you're doing wireframes, don't try to do the wireframes, onboarding, all of the features at once, because it's going to take a really, really long time and it's not really efficient. That has happened to me at one project, and we quickly realized that we need to go back and to break it down, maybe like, hey, let's do the onboarding. Once we finish the onboarding, we can actually pass it to the developers. They can start working, and then we can move on. And in parallel, the designers can actually work on the next step. And this way, you're always a bit ahead of development, but you're not taking too much time. So just try to look what you have. And obviously for smaller projects that might not be necessary, but if you're working on something big, always try to see where are the points where logically you can divide the work and work with that. So yeah, my advice here, don't try to do everything in one go if you have big projects, because at the end, you're just going to become a blocker or a bottleneck for the project that you're working on. Similarly to that, try to get feedback early and often, and the two kind of are tied together. So once you start working on something, when you have usability flow, user flows, or when you have any kind of wireframes, mocks, prototypes, try to think when you can get people involved. Don't wait too long. So first look at your internal stakeholders. And by that, I don't mean just get your designs and show them to the other designers. That's great. That should be definitely done on weekly basis. But then make sure you do the same with your team. Show what you're working on, get their thoughts, and think if there are any other stakeholders that need to see the designs. Is there a legal team that maybe needs to take a look at what you're doing? Is there a compliance team that need to tell you if what you're doing actually is compliant? So make sure you have mapped out who are the people you need to get feedback from, and try to circulate that early on so you can start feed those things into your next iterations of the design. The same things goes for external stakeholders. So when can you start doing some usability testing? Like, is it something that you can run through existing clients, just to try and see how you can adjust your work according to what you're hearing. And the reason why I'm saying is to do it early is because I have often seen designers go and they spend a lot of time and they go through wireframes and mocks and they produce really beautiful screens. And at the end they go, they have some feedback, they have sessions with clients, with users, and there's some feedback. And the longer you have spent working on something, there's this thing called sunk cost fallacy, which basically means the more effort you have put in something and more time, the less willing you are to actually abandon it or make changes. You get attached to it. And it's really painful when you spend a lot of time on something and you go and someone tells you like, no, actually, no, like I think that doesn't work, or you see in testing that users are actually struggling. If you do that in earlier stages, it's not going to have the same kind of effect, and it's not going to affect your motivation and how you feel about the project. So just try to do that early on. And if you also break your work in smaller steps, it's going to be way more iterative, and you're going to be able to go way faster through changes as well. Next thing I'm going to touch on is about tools. So you need to pick the right tools. And by that, I definitely don't mean that you have to rely on tools for the quality of your work or output. That's something that no matter what tool you're using, no matter how good it is, if you don't have the right skills, the right design thinking, the right critical thinking, the tool is not going to change your layout, it's not going to change your information architecture. So tools are great, they can speed our work, they can make things way better or worse, but they will never really change the final quality of the output of the design. So what I mean by picking the right tools is actually try to find what fits the needs of your team. Try to look at, is it actually collaboration that you're looking for? Are you working in embedded teams and maybe the designs need to be shown to many different people? Are you actually integrating with many other tools? Are you working with the Adobe suite? And that's something that you really need to do a lot. Are you looking for a tool to actually manage your design system? So try to understand what are the important things. And something that we used at TrueLayer with our team was having a weighted table to try and make the decision. So we had a set of criteria, and some of them were trying to evaluate what's important for us. Was it collaboration? Was it design system management, integration with other tools, prototyping? So try to map out a few things that you're doing on a daily basis, and then try to give each one a different weight. Then see what are the tools that you're trying to evaluate and see how they do according to the criteria. At the end, this should be something that kind of gives you an indication what might be the right one to go for. And I think it's good to try and go through this and see if there's maybe something that you're missing with the stack that you're currently working on. And yeah, just final thought on that: make sure that everyone uses the same tool. Don't try to accommodate too many desires. Just try to stick to one thing for one action, because if you have too many, then this can also become a problem when you need to share work or maybe in the way you're working. So yeah, pick what you're using and try to stick to. Another point, try to improve the handoff process. What I have seen very often take a lot of time. It's actually the collaboration between the designers and the developers that they're going to implement the design. And this can vary from some decision or some discussion that has happened on Slack then the developer takes it and they implement it in the development, in the dev environment. Then maybe this is added to some mocks. But there's a lot of going back and forth. Sometimes there's a design that's implemented, but that wasn't the final one, and some changes were made out of that. And then we end up with very, very unhappy developers that have to go and work on the same design that they have worked on probably last week, just because they didn't realize that wasn't the final thing. So really important things. Developers should know when they can start implementing the design and where to find it, those two things. So try to make sure that there's a lot of clarity on that. A way we're trying to help out and simplify this process now is through Figma. We're using Figma and we're trying to change the structure of the pages that we have. So we want to have a dedicated page in each file for the different stages of the process. So specifically around this, we have a page that is just for mocks. So this is the place where designers go, they make their changes, they can have different versions, they can try out things, they can implement feedback. But then once something is finalized and we know that this is ready to be implemented, it is moved to a different page that is called handoff. So if a developer sees something there, that means that it's ready and they can just go wild. They can go take the design, start implementing, and they shouldn't think twice about it. And then once something is has been developed, you should be moved to a page that's live. Why is this important? Sometimes we have seen that what we have in production doesn't really correspond to our final mocks. Which in the short term, it might not seem like a huge thing, like it can be like, oh, like we just move this button, or like we change something with 8 pixels, maybe, like we'll do this next time. But those things pile up, and with the time that can become a real problem, because once you pick a design then and you want to make some changes or something, you need to track back everything that you have missed. You can never do that. There's just a lot of problems. So make sure that every time, whatever you have live, it's actually also represented in your mocks. And just checking that there's
you have a question.
Yeah. Do you document on that handoff page the design for developers? By document the design for developers, do you mean what are the assets or what they need to use in terms of colors and assets, or?
Yeah, it's better to speak out. Yes, in terms of the sizes of the assets, the pixels, colors, color codes, etc.
Yeah, so I think for this, there are two approaches. I'll just tell you at what stage we are at the moment. Since we also are starting to implement, we are making this change now and we're currently trying it out. But basically what we're trying to achieve is, as I told you, we're building a design system and we have design libraries with all of the assets where we have all of the sizes predetermined. We have defined the size of our grid, what our spacing, what our spaces are. So whenever we design, we're going to have consistent numbers in there. So whenever someone goes to that page and is expecting what's in there, there's a section in Figma where you can see all of the sizes, you can see all of the pixels and all of the information that you need. So this should be accurate to what's on the page, just because we have made sure that we have consistency across what we're doing and we're using the same kind of spacing. So yeah, we don't do any additional documentation, but yeah, we're testing this out and we're trying to see what else we need to add in there. If anyone has experience with that or any thoughts on, like what can be improved, I would be more than happy to hear what others have been through and how they have solved that problem.
In my opinion, for example, in OutSystems, we also have a design systems, and I think it works pretty well. What I think sometimes works really good as well is that you connect. So you do a prototype so they can actually navigate them through and understand the whole experience. More than just having the screens in Figma that they can check. Sometimes I think the prototype is very useful for them to navigate and to understand what kind of interaction we want at a certain point.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think prototypes are great, and they're I think not only for developers handoff, but also sharing things with your team and trying to get things through. I think you should definitely have things to show interactions apart from just showing screens. I think sometimes if you just pass the prototype files, they can be a bit confusing if a developer has to look at them and see what screens exactly they need to work on. So I still think they need to be separated. But yeah, prototypes are a must, and they really should be there. Another thing that we do sometimes, and we have done in the past, is to help speed of the process. Sometimes the designers should pair with the developers and just do a session where they look through the designs and clear out some things. So depending on what works and what stage you are, that's also an option. And I think these kind of pairings and designers and developers working together for some things, it really helps to understand each other's work better. So I think you get a lot more appreciations of what developers are doing and understanding how they approach things and what are the things that they might need next time because of the questions they ask. But they also have a better grasp of why some designs are done in a way. They can ask, why is this button here? Why are you using this component and not this one? So you can start giving them a bit of a context, and the more everyone understands why you have taken a certain decision and start thinking in the similar way, the easier it will be next time also to go through the same process. I hope that answered the question, but yeah.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. But yeah, if there's anything else, let's continue the conversation at the end. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I'm pretty sure that everyone have run into this problem one or more than once in their careers. And yeah, that was actually the last thing. I have also here the similar checklist with just summarizing what the things are. But before we move on, I just wanted to actually show again, what we talked about. So this time, if we look at how do we organize a project, we actually want our strategy and tactics to be balanced out. And just to tie it up to actually what I was speaking about, and if someone actually lost my thought and why I spent 4 hours speaking about strategy and tactics when actually I announced the talk as something completely different, is because I think those two are really, really linked together. And if we just change these, that's the answer that we want to have. We should try to find a way to balance those things out, and that's when we're going to get good results. That's when we get used to work in the way where we won't have to always think that the only way to go forward is to choose either quality or speed, because that should never be the thing that we try to do. One or another doesn't do the work. We always want to have them together and balanced. And with that, I just want to finish with one thing, because I think I gave you all of the checklists, I gave you some advices, and I spoke for 1 hour as if I have mastered everything, and completely we have eradicated any kind of problems, and we're just flying through everything. And one thing that we don't speak a lot about in those talks or whenever we give advice is that this is never a linear process. Things don't just happen, and if you succeed, you succeed, and if you don't, you don't. So I just wanted to tell you, don't whenever you do something, don't get discouraged. Some projects are going to go better depending on who you're working with. We might have better collaboration or not, but just try to take those. I'm not going to call them failures, but those moments where things are not going as you'd expect or as you'd have imagined, or they don't go as the checklist that someone on a talk gave you. Just try to remember that next time it will be better. Take them as an opportunity to actually learn something, or remember what went wrong, and just try to do it in a different way next time, and try to adjust things to the way you do to your team, because if there are some general guidelines, there's not solution that fits everyone, and you should just try to find it, and don't get discouraged whenever it doesn't work every single time. So there's going to be ups and downs. Yeah, that's what I wanted to finish on, just don't give up and try to, like stay motivated and just learn from whenever things go wrong. And now I'm actually going to slow down again for a moment, and I'm just going to open again for questions. Again, just use the chat, unmute yourself. Or, like not only questions, if there's anything that you want to share from, like your experience or something that's...
Sorry, I asked them to unmute themselves, so maybe somebody just got unmuted and not wanted to. Thank you, Desi, a lot. And guys, feel free to pose any question. If you feel more comfortable doing it on the chat, feel free to do so. It's not mandatory that you unmute and make it. Okay, Norbert, you want?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
You're hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. I enjoyed it very much. You mentioned earlier that you had some growing pains when your company started to grow, and I was wondering how you managed to establish these tactics and the strategy that you shared with us today. How did you manage to implement it while you were growing? And did you have to deal with remote teams, for instance? And how does this strategy fit in such organization?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's actually a really interesting question, especially the second part. And I'll tell you a bit more in a second. I'll address the first bit. When you ask me how we dealt with these growing pains and how actually, like we managed to start implementing and doing some of those things. So first thing that was really important was that at the time that we made the change, so we were experiencing all of those growing pains and we had different structure of the teams. So the first thing that was done company-wide is try to restructure it, and we went into a way more vertical way of structuring teams and having them be a lot more autonomous. So that's when designers moved to those teams, but that's all that happened. We still had the centralized team and we were working on a design system, but then what happened was that there was not a level design leading or anything in the organization. So I think all of the designers were just siloed working on teams, and they were getting a lot of work that they needed to finish. There were a lot of changing of priorities. So it wasn't a very good experience always in terms of the priorities and what was happening. So I think one first step is to make sure that there's a person that's addressing that. There's someone who is going to go and actually try to work with the different teams, try to work with the product managers, with the tech leads, and try to start thinking of how the design work is going to be structured in a better way according to the team goals. So some of the things that I mentioned before, and then slowly you can start to move the needle in a direction. But yeah, it's not a really fast process and it cannot happen overnight, but yeah, make sure that if you have distributed teams and you have embedded designers and there are a lot of teams, make sure that there's someone who is making sure that they're, like apart from the people working on the projects, there's a level of a design lead or design manager or someone who is looking over those processes. The second part is actually, I think, last March, when we went into a lockdown, we were around 80 people when the design team was way smaller than what it was now. So a lot of those changes and a lot of those things happened in the last year, and we have done all of that remote. So actually, I won't be able to tell you how that would have worked out if we were in the office. I think we're at the point that we're experiencing things for the first time, being fully remote. And yeah, I'd actually like to see how this would have developed, or maybe it would have been different if we were fully present in an office.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your experience.
No problem. Thank you for the question.
Any more questions, guys? Please don't be shy. Considering Jean-Lyne's question and what you replied, Desi, I also agree. And for example, in my case, going back to the handoff, we generally always have a meeting with the developer to discuss every point. So I think that's a good point you made, and it's very, very important to do so. I think there are a lot of things here that you went through that are clearly the process that we should follow, but many times it just doesn't happen. And I think you put it very, very, I don't know, blunt and clear in your presentation, and thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and like things never go usually as we imagine them, and usually we are not the kind of functional role where people go and they ask like, hey, like how do you want to do things? Like it really depends, but usually we kind of follow what like what the team is doing. So I think the approach would be just try to like try to be more proactive and try to see how like use some of those things, take initiative. Sometimes like it might happen that sometimes you feel that you're annoying people by, hey, like they have time for a chat, can we look at this, can we do that? But eventually it turns, like if you're patient and you're really bringing things that are valuable to the person in, like if you invite someone for a meeting, make sure that the things that you're bringing up are actually important and they're going to be relevant for their work. So next time that they won't be, like they'll be happier to actually spend some time with you and speak about things. So it's not always easy, but you should try to, like apart from all of the other work that you're doing, always try to speak and speak out and do those things and raise those questions. And that doesn't only go for like design leads or someone who is in a leadership position. That goes to all product designers or every designers. Like it might be that you're working on a team where you don't have a product designer, you don't have a lead, or you're working in a smaller company and you're the only designer. But you should always be in a position, no matter what you're doing, to try and think about those things, ask those questions. If you're given a project to work on, start with asking questions like, why are we doing that? What are we trying to achieve? And just get into the habit of challenging yourself first and then challenge the others whenever there are things.
Completely agree. Well, like made a question here that I in a way, I think you kind of just replied, but I will read it. If there were any engineer or product managers listening, what would you advise? What advice would you give them about working with design?
So my advice is similar. I think they would get to a way, like I think usually product managers or engineers often see design as a bottleneck or something that should just be done quickly and out of the way. And I think they always think that we are trying to like spend a lot of time just on screens and do those things. And they try to push that for like the later stage or try to rush that. My advice would be try to understand a bit better also what your design team is doing and how they can help you, and try to also run those conversations and just consider this in the beginning of every project, because user experience is not something that just happens. That should be something that like you have either bad or good experience. If you start asking for user experience when you have already taken the decisions and you have a user flow or something, that's not going to work. So yeah, just speak to your designers, understand how they can help you and how you can actually make them more valuable for your team.
Thank you, Desi.
Okay, I do have another question, if I may. Well, we're talking about scaling up your UX and scaling up your work and your teams. And I was wondering if you have any kind of advice regarding the negotiation of the definition of your UX design. I mean, you don't have all the time for designing your experience, for designing your mockups, or even for creating your prototypes. So where's the sweet spot that you would use as a way for defining your UX design as done for or as ready for delivery, I mean ready for the handoff, so that you can cope with the work that you have to do. I'm asking this for those cases where you have a lot of work in your hands. You don't want to deliver a poor user experience, but you don't want to leave your development teams without any UX support at all. So what would be the sweet spot for you to negotiate your definition of done for the UX?
So there are quite a few things in this question. I think also, like just to be completely honest, I don't think we're at the point of always having the sweet spot and like hitting it and having the right answers, and we are still struggling with trying to find the right way. But I can tell you what I think and what's important to actually get to this point. First of all, I think that's part of the things that I was speaking about. So the scope of what you're doing should be defined even before you start working on, because very often what I see is that we kind of have a product brief that like describes maybe some of the technical part, maybe some of the UX UI part, but then there are too many things involved in there. There's like this additional feature, there's like this additional that. So make sure that whenever you start working on, first of all, estimate, like, is it clear what we're doing? Estimate how much you're going to need to do to actually finish this project and have good quality, and communicate that to your product manager. That's something that I sometimes do, and like I'm sure many people feel the same, that like we get very eager about the project, and like we really want to make our team happy and enable them, and we kind of overestimate how much time underestimate how much time we're going to need, or like in what time we can finish. So first of all, be very clear with what are the things that are in scope, how long do you need to do them, and if you actually need more time to produce a quality design for something, and there are more things in scope, just try to communicate that. Say like, hey, actually, like we don't have enough people, and we cannot do that. We either like do less things, but we do them properly, or like we need to find a different approach. And it's really important to sometimes be able to also say no, that we cannot do that. It's not a nice experience to not be able to please your development team or your product manager. But if you always try to negotiate, or try to a place where you do more work, or you actually, eventually what happens is that if you want to get better quality of your work and you don't have time, you just overwork yourself, because that's what happens in reality. But sometimes if you get to a point where you're like, okay, no, we cannot do this project because we don't have enough people. We cannot do that because we're out of scope. That's also something that, even if disappoints your team and developers at this point, it is something that can clearly indicate to your company that maybe you need to hire more people. If you don't have enough time to work on things, and you cannot work with all of the teams, maybe that's something that should be negotiated, and it should be looked at, apart from always trying to just negotiate and split time.
Okay, thank you very much. I need to bring you to my stakeholders so that I can have someone else telling them that we need to hire more people.
Well, that's the thing, like why other stakeholders that they can do that in the scenario that I told you. You have all of the disappointed developers and product managers, or whoever didn't get any support. So bring them up. If there was a project that didn't go through, or you couldn't, or they didn't have enough time, or was very delayed, do a postmortem. Try to see what were the things that go wrong. And if a lot of people actually say, hey, yeah, like the design work, we didn't have designers, or that happened, just bring those people in whenever you're speaking about those things. Try to find people who are affected by that and bring them into the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much again.
I think one of the things that sometimes can be helpful for that, Norberto, is just put a roadmap in front of them, and the capacity of like how many people you have and what you will be able to tackle. I don't know if you agree, Desislava, or not, but
sure, and I've done it all. I've done it all.
Okay. Flipa Agua is saying many times UX designers have to deal with team members with other type of expertise that instead of giving just their opinion, actually want to decide the experience of certain functionality, and they give you a really hard time. What is your advice for designers that have to deal with this type of situation?
I think in this case, that's something that should be made very clear. I think you're, if I understand correctly, the example is maybe if you're showing the review to different, you're having a review with different stakeholders, and maybe you have, I don't know, someone from the commercial team telling you, hey, you actually need to change that because I think so, or I think that's better. So there are a few things that you can do here. So first of all, I think that's something that we try to do at TrueLayer, and just in general, be very clear that getting feedback is a great thing. We always try to look and hear what people think and try to incorporate whenever we think that something works. But those feedback sessions, or whenever you try to get feedback from something, it is completely optional to, like, what are the things that we're going to implement. So just set expectations before you hear the opinion of someone. Say, hey, like, we have worked on that. And similarly to the question that I answered earlier, if you have anything that can back you up, apart from just like your own expertise and just saying that, hey, like, I'm the expert in UX, and like, I think that's better. That's really easy to tackle. If someone has it's just used, or maybe it's in a different position, or maybe it's someone who has a more senior level, it's really easy to just get their opinion and try to get that across. So again, the same advice: set expectations when you're getting feedback that like you really value what they're saying, but this doesn't mean that necessarily those changes will be made. Maybe some things can be tested, maybe they can be addressed, and always try to have any kind of like data, or why did you take this decision? Did you do any testing? What is it based on? Try to have those things ready and present them. And usually that works with people who have very strong opinions, and try to really dictate how things should be, just because they assume something is good.
Thank you a lot. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I totally agree. And like in my behalf, if I may, sometimes we tend to take this kind of personally when it's like it's all about the project. So sometimes just facing that as like, this is feedback, and just as Desi said, like, extract what is constructive and kind of ignore what is not constructive. And as Desi said, like, just ask the why. Why would change this would be better? In what sense? Because sometimes it's easy, I think, to speak when you see something that is already built. And it's easier to criticize than actually to build it. But my main take here would be like, try it as much as you can to don't take it personally. I think sometimes we as designers, we kind of handle our designs as like our babies. This is like the thing, and actually,
no, sure. I think we have to think about a project as a collaborative thing, and everyone has opinions. But I think everyone thinks that they are designers too, because there are a lot of people in different companies that thinks that design or UX design is the same as UI design. I think there is a lot of confusion here about these subjects, these areas. And sometimes we find people that have a really big ego, and we have to deal with that. And it's really, really hard, because you have your user interviews saying that this solution that I'm presenting is good. Your solution, it can has some how can I say, some things that are good, but the other things are not that good, and I cannot use your solution to and put in the product just because you want to. Sometimes we find some people that are like this, and it's really hard to deal with them. That's why my question, because I think I'm talking for a lot of designers. I heard a lot of stories about like this one, and yeah, that's why I did this question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's actually, like, it really also depends from what you're saying. It seems that they're coming to present already solution or something that it's very different from what you have created. And you're right that there's a lot of misunderstanding about UX, about UI, and just in general why some things are done. So another advice I would give is just try to educate people whenever you can. If you're presenting something, just try to sneak in a bit extra information, or like why you took that decision, or like what's like related to UX, why you did that. I try to do that sometimes when I do presentations, and like I hope that that's going to kind of like raise the understanding of all of the non-designers that after that are going to present something, and hopefully it's going to affect those kind of situations. Most probably with people with really big ego, that's not going to be the thing that moves the needle. But yeah, again, I would suggest if that's someone who is, like we can just ignore, like if that's not someone from your senior team, most probably you can just try to tell them and explain that that's not the thing that you're going for. And again, it's okay to make people unhappy sometimes if that's not the thing that solves the problem.
Exactly.
Thank you for your question. João just agreed on the chat, saying he often faces the same problem as Felipe. I do think this is a cultural problem that companies or teams in those companies have, that they don't look to design teams as key part of the early stage of the project. Things are changing slowly, but I think they are. That's a good sign. And I totally agree. And Desi just spoke this in the beginning, right? That this early involvement is key, but I let you follow up on this, Desi.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It is changing slowly, and as I said, it's also up to us, because if we just wait for it to happen, it won't. We need to try and start, like pushing things, so we move them a bit forward.
Mirta said, as Jorge and João said, this is a problem that should be solved first on the leadership level to influence the overall culture and empower designer, PM and engineers to collaborate in harmony. And she said, great talk, Desi. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I don't think that should be solved first in the leadership level or the stakeholders of the company. I do think that this is something that we as designers should force a bit, and make. We should make us listen to us. We should intervene more and have something to say in this topic.
So thanks, Joe. I think that's a good point, but I think again there's like I think there are nuances. It's really hard to say that it's like one thing or the other. I wouldn't say that like it's only like leadership or only designers. I think there should be effort bottom up and the other way around. If you just try to do something on like from the bottom up, like you might get somewhere, but that's not going to change the overall culture, and you might end up spending all of your time trying to like iterate in the same process and just keep this going. Whereas once there's also something coming from the top down and the leadership is, like actually approaching those things, and maybe, like next time when there's a restructuring of the company, they think like, hey, like actually, what should we do in order for designers to be, like function better, and start thinking whenever those big changes or things are happening and how processes are made, they should also have design in mind. So it's really important that I think we work from both directions, and at the end, like ideally we should get to a point where things are just working. But yeah, I think slowly things are happening, and hopefully we'll get to this spot soon.
I totally agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Does anyone else have any other question or feedback or experience that you would like to share?
I think maybe I think maybe that were all of the questions, and maybe people were already at the point where they're tired and a bit hungry.
Dinner, yes. Desi, thank you a lot for your talk and for accepting this invite. It was great to have you, and it was a great presentation. So thank you a lot, and thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, again, thanks a lot for inviting me. It was like it was a great experience to come and talk about some of the things and learnings that I have from the last 2 years. And again, thanks to everyone who actually spent an hour and a half tonight to listen to me. And thank you for the questions. I think there were some really interesting topics that they come up, and we should really talk about those things more and try to address them.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Desi. And thank you all. Bye. Good night.
Have a really good evening, everyone.
Bye.